Likutei Sichos, Chelek Yud, Vayishlach Yud Tes Kislev. What is Yud Tes Kislev? What is what happens on Yud Tes Kislev? How does it affect us as individuals? This is something that this Sikha is going to delve into and explore based on the Rashi, in the first Rashi of the Parsha, with a beautiful Pirush from the Maggid of Mezrich. So it's a longer Sikha a little bit, but it's a very Gishmaka Sikha. We'll try to move a little faster than usual, so that way it doesn't take too long. But we certainly want to go through this as we gear up and prepare ourselves for the Yom Tiv, Rosh Hashanah LaChasidus, Yud Tes Kislev. K'kedushas merucham yad mor siper shebeshabes parshas Vayishlach Tovkuf Lamed Gimel hashabes ha'achareino l'chayi Rav Magid b'Mezrich b'chayim chayuse b'al modein. The Frierdiker Rebbe tells over in a Sikha that on Shabbos parshas Vayishlach Tovkuf Lamed Gimel 1773, which was the Mezricher Magid's final Shabbos on this physical earth, Omar b'shachvei al mitosei b'maimid ha'chavraya kadisha, he said the following teaching while lying on his bed in the presence of the Chavraya Kadisha. The Chavraya Kadisha was a term used to describe the group, the society of the Talmidei HaMagid. So he said like this, the Pasuk says, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim. Yaakov sent malachim. Now some Mefarshim say malachim means messengers, human messengers. Upirish Rashi, however, Rashi says malachim mamish, that it means actually angels. So the Maggid said, what's pshat malachim mamish? Ha-mamish shala malachim shalach Yaakov le'Esav. The mamish, the tangible, the physical part of the malachim was sent by Yaakov to Esav. Aval ha-ruchnius nisherim Yaakov, but the ruchnius remained with Yaakov. V'tzarech la'avim bazeh. So on this teaching of the Maggid says that the Ruchniistic part, the essence, so to speak, of the Malachim remained with Yaakov. And Yaakov sent to Esav the mamish, the external, the physical element of the Malachim. So we have to understand. The whole reason why Yaakov used angels, even though generally you're not supposed to use angels for your personal bidding. He didn't send humans. It would make sense to say that Yaakov's intention was that the Malachim should be mevarer Esav. They should refine him, uplift him. The only Malachim have the power to be mevarer Esav, and therefore he sent Malachim and not people, so that they can get the job done. That I move But in that case, the question would be asked: why would Yaakov keep the ruchnius, the spiritual element of the malachim, for himself? Obviously, it's the spiritual element of the malachim that is going to be able to do this birur. He's not sending malachim for them to do a birur out of the mamashos of the malachim. So what would be the purpose or the gain of sending the malachim, especially if he's keeping their ruchnius with him? Before we get into this into why did he send this and not that, the whole concept is not understood. Ha-mamish shel malachim, hainu aguf shelahem, v'ruchniyusam hainu nafsham. V'leima ha-mamish shelahem nishlach le'Esav, v'ruchniyus nisharei etzel Yaakov. How do you separate it? How do you separate the mamish, the guf, the body, the physical of the malach from the spiritual, the soul of the malach? Even by a human being or even by an animal, it's impossible for the body to accomplish anything without the soul. Which the body is totally subjugated and totally secondary to the nefesh, to the soul. And certainly by a malach, which the main part of the malach, the primary aspect of the malach, is the nefesh. How do you separate the guf, if you will, or whatever would be considered a guf, the mamish of the malach, and send it to do a job, a function, without its nefesh? So that's two questions so far. Number one, why would Yaakov not send the ruchnius of the malachim, since his whole goal was to be mevarer Esav? Number two, how do you even separate the guf and the nefesh, or the ruchnius and the gashmius of the malach? And then we have a third question. Gam tzarach lavin. Mipashtos pirush Rashi. Malachim mamish nidish akavanose lishte la pirush shalach shluchim basavada. The fact that Rashi adds the word mamish, literally or actually angels, is to negate the other commentaries who say that it was human messengers. The hainu shevetevas mamish, how do you madgish or you malachim mamish, the lemitzias acheres. But meaning to say, the word mamish, Rashi is emphasizing the fact that these were angels, really angels, not any other entity. So obviously Rashi means that they were entirely a malach. It was a malach in its full entirety. But according to the Magid, who wants to say that we're negating, or we're excluding rather, the ruchnius, the spiritual element of the malach, that the Esav did not get the entirety of the malach, because their main element is their spirituality, and if their spirituality remained behind, then Esav only was sent a part of the malach, and not the malach in its entirety. So seemingly the pirush of the Magid is incongruous with the pirush of Rashi. Rashi is trying to emphasize it was really a malach, it was much more spiritual than a human being. And the Magid is saying it wasn't really a malach, it was just a part of a malach. So that's our third question. That the Magid is coming to seemingly interpret Rashi or explain Rashi, and he ends up being the opposite of what Rashi seems to be trying to tell us. So that's our question on this Maimer of the Magid. These are our questions on this Maimer of the Magid of Mezrich. So in Ois Beis we're going to answer the question. And we're going to say that it doesn't mean that that we split the malach in half, and we sent one part to Esav and the other part remained behind. It means that the whole malach went to Esav, but it spiritually remained connected to Yaakov. So based on all these questions, because of all these questions, we must conclude that the Magid's intent was not to tell us that Yaakov sent only the mamish, only the tangible physical aspect, the body of the malach, which is secondary and of no significance to the malach without the spirituality. So we can't say that he's sending that to Esav. The Magid wants to tell us the sending of the malachim was in such a manner that even coming to Esav, when they were present by Esav, with their guf and their nefesh, with their full entirety, nevertheless, this is a very important nekuda, because this is going to come up later on in the Sikha. They were not disconnected from their bond, from their hiskashrus to Yaakov at any time. In the Ha'ara, he points out that the lashon of the Magid in Yiddish is mit Yaakov. That when he says that the mamish went to Esav and the ruchnius remained, it says mit Yaakov, with Yaakov, not ba Yaakov. I'm not trying to say ba in English. People say by, but I don't know what that means. Ba Yaakov would mean near Yaakov, that they remained in the physical space of Yaakov. Mit Yaakov means with Yaakov, could be even spiritually speaking. What the Maggid is telling us is that Malachim were sent by Yaakov to Esav. They went as a Malach, Guf and Nefesh. Whatever makes up a Malach went. But nevertheless, at any given moment, even while being in the presence of Esav, they remain connected to Yaakov. Ad sheki'ilu bo le'esav rak begufam v'mamish alayim bilvad. It's as if they only came to Esav with their physical element, because their spirituality was connected to Yaakov at all times. Which means that they felt it was nirgish. It was they felt at any moment that this is not their place. Their true place where they belong is by Yaakov. Visham, Ikaram, Vinafsham, that is their primary residence or their primary place. And that's where their soul belongs. And the fact that they find themselves by Esav is only as a secondary function, solely for the purpose of fulfilling the shlichus of Yaakov. It's just like in the person, his guf, his physicality is not a true or full identity. It's only secondary to the nefesh. So too, by the malachim, they felt that they don't belong where they are. They're only there, let's even say the word temporarily, to fulfill the shlichus of Yaakov. But where do they truly belong? They truly belong by Yaakov Avinu. So this answers a number of questions. This answers how you can split up the malachim, because they weren't split because they went entirely to Esav. This also explains the question was, why would he leave the nefesh behind if he wants to be mevarer Esav? He didn't leave the nefesh behind. Both the guf and the nefesh went. It's just that they constantly felt their connection to Yaakov. And then we'll answer now the third question that we had, where we thought that there was a stira, a contradiction between the Maggid's pshat of Rashi and the basic understanding of Rashi. So we'll understand that now we'll realize that not only does the pirush of the Maggid not contradict this simple understanding, the basic understanding of this word mamish in Rashi, the Maggid is clarifying and explaining what the word mamish means. Lifel birur be'esav, tachlis hagashmis ve'achomrius. The ability that malachim mamish have to be able to effect a birur, a refining and cleansing of Esav, which Esav is the epitome of physicality and materialism. Is only if their soul and their spirituality is connected and dvuka, in his cleaving is an even stronger connection to Yaakov. And they don't change even in Esav's presence. Shepirusha shel hamagid sherak hamam mishalach Yaakov leEsav madgish eid yeser es apirish apashal shel teves mamish sheshalach es malachim be'efet shoyev nisharu malachim mamish. Comes out that the Magid's pirush, that he sent the mamish to Esav and the ruchnis remained behind, he's actually explaining that even when the malachim were by Esav, they were real malachim. Why were they real malachim? Because they were connected to Yaakov Avinu. Because they recognize that this is not their place. So we've turned this around a little bit. Initially, we thought that we were separating, the spirituality was staying by Yaakov, and the physicality was going to Esav. And we wondered, then you're not sending the whole malach. So now we're saying first, although we are sending the whole malach, but by the Maggid explaining this idea that the whole malach goes, but remains connected to Yaakov, that means that he's a real malach. If the malach would go to Yaakov and would forget where its real place is, would think that it belongs by Esav, then he would lose some of his malach status, because he's losing himself. By Esav, by the malachim mamish, Meaning to say, by going and connecting to Yaakov at all times, this is how they retain the fact that they're Malachim Mamish. And now the Magid of Mezrich is actually clarifying and explaining what does Rashi mean Malachim Mamish. What does it mean they were real Malachim? They were so real that even when they left Yaakov and they went to Esav, they did not disconnect from Yaakov for even a moment. And with this, we answer the question on the Rashi, on the Magid. We now understand what the Magid is saying. We now understand what Rashi is saying. Asked and answered. In Ois Gimel, we're going to now begin to utilize this teaching as a message to us, as those who followed in the ways of the Magid of Mezrich, or the ways of Chassidus, and in the ways of the Talmud of the Magid of Mezrich, who later was Meyasid, Teres Chassidus Chabad, the Alter Rebbe. Ois Gimel. This teaching of the Magid and the lesson that we're going to learn from it in our Aveda, Yuvam B'Teisefes Biur will be understood with even more explanation. If we contemplate for a moment on the time and the situation that this Torah was said. As mentioned before, the Magid said this on his final Shabbos of his life before his Istalkus. We can understand from this that this Maimer has sort of a last will and testament, and a general lesson, a general teaching in how to serve Hashem according to Chassidus, and not just for that time, but for the generations to come. In other words, the Magid was leaving this world and left us a message by teaching this Vayishlach, by Malachim Mamish, teaching this Rashi to us. He was teaching us a message in Avodas Hashem. Umikivan shmi bein talmidav shel Rav Magid, hoyad murazokin at talmid achav of beYeser, and since amongst all the talmidim of the Magid, the Alter Rebbe was his most precious student, as he brings in the order from the Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, that he said that my mechuten, meaning to say the Alter Rebbe, was very precious in the eyes of our teacher, the Magid of Mezritz, and he would speak extensively in his praise. Back into the Sikha. As we know, the Alter Rebbe, the Magid of Mezritz learned with the Alter Rebbe in a unique way. In greater amounts than he learned with the other Talmidim. As also known the statement of the Berditchev, Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, all of us ate from the same plate. And the Litvak, the Lithuanian, this meaning the Alter Rebbe as he was known by the other Talmidei Magid, took the choicest part. In Yiddish the word is smetana, which means cream, the creme de la creme. That, in other words, we all learned from the same Rebbe, but nevertheless the Alter Rebbe, the Litvak, took the creme de la creme, took the best. Hurry, move on. So since we know that the Alter Rebbe was so precious by the Magid of Mezrich, it's clear that this teaching of the Magid, which was said so close to his Istalkus, is directed even more than the rest of the Talmidei Magid to the Aved of the Alter Rebbe, meaning, namely, to the Seder Aved of Chassidus Chabad. This teaching is even more applicable to the Aved of Chassidus Chabad. And to take it even a step further, the Magid said to the Alter Rebbe, Yud Tes Kislev is our Yom Hilula. Yom Hilula is a term usually used for a yahrzeit, but literally it means the day of celebration or day of a wedding. Hilula is a celebration. So the Magid said to the Alter Rebbe, Yud Tes Kislev is our celebration day. Yud Tes Kislev Tavkuf Lamed Gimel Nistalek Rav Magid. That year, Yud Tes Kislev Tavkuf Lamed Gimel, the Magid was Nistalek. I said before 1773, but Ba'etzim it's 772 because it's probably before the end of the Gregorian year. Ubeisa yom, on that very same day, Yud Tes Kislev, Bishnas Tavkuf Nun Tes, Yotza Admor Hazaken Lechedus Mimasari Bavur Zeh Shagil Teres Achsidus. And some years later, the Alter Rebbe goes out of jail, of imprisonment on that same day, which he was imprisoned for the spreading and teach of the Teres Achsidus. Mistaber Leimar. So since the Alter Rebbe the Maggid said that Yud Tes Kislev is our Yom HaHilula, it makes sense to say Shatera Nala Yes VaAmra Maggid Lifnei Yom HaHilula Shaloi. Yesh lo shayches miyuchedes le'im ha'ilula shel Admor Hazaken and le'im geulas Admor Hazaken. That this teaching is specifically connected to the Alter Rebbe's Hilula, meaning the Alter Rebbe's day of Geula. In other words, not only are we saying that the Maggid's teaching these was a tzavot to the world, not only are we saying that it's connected specifically to the Alter Rebbe and to Chassidus Chabad because of the close connection that the Alter Rebbe had with the Maggid, but it's also connected specifically to Yud Tes Kislev because it was said right before Yud Tes Kislev, and the Maggid connected the two Yud Tes Kislevs together. So, if you want to understand what is the deeper message in this vort, in this maimer of the Maggid of Mezrich, we're going to have to delve a little bit into what is Yud Tes Kislev. That's what he's going to talk about in his Dalet. Is going to speak about Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza. And he's going to say something very fascinating. He's going to say that Yud Tes Kislev is not just something that changed with regards to Chassidus, but it's something that is also changed with regards to us, to Chassidim, or to Klal Yisrael. Eis Dalet. Yom Geula Zeh Yud Tes Kislev HaChidush Shebayu Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza. The Chidush of Yud Tes Kislev is the idea of Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza. Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza is what the Baal Shem Tov, what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov. In response to his question, when is Mashiach going to come? The Mashiach answered, when the well springs of your teachings will be spread out into the outside world, as far as can be. Not an exact translation, but a paraphrase. And then, of course, we know that by Yud Tes Kislev, the spreading of Chassidus was expanded into a whole new level. So the inyan of Yud Tes Kislev is that there was a whole new level of Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza. In Teira Shalom, which he references in the Orah, it says that the main idea of Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza began after Peterburg. Because the whole inyan of Chassidus is that anybody, even a simpleton, should be able to understand an inyan eliki, a godly concept. And this is the whole idea of Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza, and this became possible much more after Yud Tes Kislev. Okay. And even though it's very simply understood what it means. It means the spreading of the well springs of Chassidus. Nevertheless, to take it a step further, since Yidden are connected to Torah, not only are they connected like two separate things that are connected together, but Yisrael V'Daisa Kulachad, Yidden and Torah are one thing. How they move on Shekasher Nasa Chidush B'Pchinas HaTorah. When there's a Chidush, when there's something new introduced on the level of Torah, Nasa Chidush Dugmasei B'Eisa Shah Gam B'Pchinas Yisrael. Then at the same time, there's also a chiddush, something new introduced with regards to the level of Yidden. Just to say that again, because it's such a fundamental idea here, that Yud Tes Kislev, which there was a change in the Torah, in B'chinas HaTorah, because Chassidus was introduced onto a whole new level. It must be because Yidden are synonymous with Torah. It must be that something was introduced, something new became possible for a Yid or for Yidden as well. And therefore this will apply to this novelty, this newness that was introduced to Tes Kislev, that it's not just something that affects Torah, it is also something that affects the Yid. And he's going to explain that in this next paragraph. When we say the well springs that began their dissemination into the outside world On Yud Tes Kislev, it's referring to the well springs of Pnimiyas HaTeira, the inner dimension of Teira, which is also known as Nishmas HaDeiraisa, the soul of Teira. Before Yud Tes Kislev, what was mostly revealed was the body of Teira, the Nigla of Teira. But the soul of Teira, which is the inner parts, the inner dimension of Teira, that until Yud Tes Kislev was Behelim. Now, of course, there was the Baal Shem Tov, there was the Maggid, there was the Alter Rebbe before, there was obviously other revelations, but compared to the Gili of Yud Tes Kislev, before Yud Tes Kislev is still considered a Helim. It was concealed. The same thing we could apply, we're using the term Guf and Neshama, the same thing will apply to the person. I'm sorry. This concept that the neshama was behelim and the guf was begilui, which is before Yud Tes Kislev, is like a person's neshama v'guf. The body is something that's exposed. It's recognizable. You can see it. You can touch it. Not only you can't grasp the neshama with the five senses: sight, smell, touching, tasting, and hearing. You can't hear a neshama, you can't see a neshama, you can't taste the neshama. So not only that it's not graspable with the five senses, five physical senses, you can't even grasp the neshama with the kayach of the intellect, which is so much more refined than the five senses. The seichel could reach the knowledge that a neshama exists, because the neshama is impacting the body. The fact that the guf is alive, it forces the intellect to come to the conclusion that there's a soul that is giving it life. But the definition of the soul, what it is beyond comprehension of the human intellect. So just like the guf is visible and the neshama is not only it's not visible, it's not graspable, so too, until Yud Tes Kislev, the guf of Teira was visible and graspable, but the neshama was not. And on Yud Tes Kislev, Yud Tes Kislev, and what was introduced in Yud Tes Kislev, that also this concealed and deeper, innermost part of Teira was drawn down and became possible to be revealed. And so much so you could learn it, you could grasp it with seichel, so you could grasp the secrets of Teira, the inner part of Teira, just like you can grasp nigla, and you could even teach it and disseminate it to the outside world. And now he goes back. We started saying that whatever is introduced in Teira is also introduced in the person. So just like Yud Tes Kislev, there was this unbelievable revelation that this Nishmas HaDeiraisa that up until now was concealed, now became revealed, and you could learn it and understand it. This chiddush that it happened in the Teira, Gilui Nishmas HaDeiraisa, the revelation of the soul of Teira, bidugmasei. Similarly, the al yodei, and because of that, nischadesh as gam b'chinas Yisrael, the same thing was introduced also on the level of the Yid, sha'neshama sheboy, the Yid's neshama, shemitzad atzmai behelim kanal, that on its own accord it is concealed, as we mentioned earlier. But because of Yud Tes Kislev and because of the Gilui of Nishmas HaDeiraisa, it became possible that Toyer, that's the Begilui, Hainu Gam Binyani Aguf Shalei, that the Neshama should shine in a revealed way, even in his physical bodily functions. Bodily functions means, let's say the actions of the body. This is an incredibly important nekuda, that Yud Tes Kislev is not just the hisgalus of Teiras HaChassidus on a whole new level, but it is also the day that it becomes possible that the neshama of a Yid should shine begili on a guf in a way that prior to this it wasn't possible. And now we're going to explain in the next few Asias, we're going to explain what is the pshat that the guf, that the neshama should shine into the guf. What does it mean? That the neshama should toyer etzlei begilui begam binyanei haguf shalei. So I say he's going to begin biur hadavar, the explanation. And the way the neshama is revealed into the body, there's two general ways. Aleph, his galus neshama b'midah kazu sheyesh la shlita ala guf. The neshama is revealed to the guf in a way that it controls the guf, the body. V'haguf nichna la, and the body submits to the neshama. But it does not negate the fact that the guf still feels itself as an independent entity. The guf feels itself as an independent entity, and the neshama tells it what to do, and the guf listens. But the guf can always choose not to listen, theoretically speaking. In other words, the guf is its own person, its own entity. Beis, the second and higher level, is sha'neshama hi bizgalus kol kach behaguf at sha'aguf einoi metzius la'atzmei klal. The neshama is so revealed, so impactful onto the guf that the guf loses its independent entity, which this is the amitis in Yegilei neshama b'guf. This is the true revelation of the neshama and the guf. That the guf becomes loses its metzius, it becomes totally one with the neshama. And to understand this, what does this even mean? He's going to use a mashal from the relationship of the nefesh abamis, the nefesh achiyunis, with the guf. That when a person is alive, his soul, meaning to say his either the animal soul or his life soul, the soul that gives it life, it tells him what to do. Move your hand, put your hand down, shake your head, shake, and he does it. There's a seamless connection between the nefesh abamis and the guf. And that's the mashal that he's going to use to explain that when the neshama is bizgalus in the guf, there is also a seamless connection between the neshama, the nefesh elikis, and the guf. And we'll use an example of the guf, of the guf and nefesh abamis. You can't differentiate between the two of them, the body and the nefesh abamis, and say that the body is its own entity. And it's fulfilling the ratzon of the nefesh abamis because it's being commanded to do so and it's under its control. Can't say that. Since the soul, the nefesh meaning, is the giving the guf its life, it is totally one with a total oneness and nullification. The nefesh doesn't have to tell the guf, do this, do that. Automatically, because it's giving it life, it is totally bottled to it, and therefore, automatically, the guf does the ratzon of the nefesh. Al derech zeh, the nimshol is going to be to the neshama. Al derech zeh u'b'negiah l'chayis and neshama b'nei Yisrael. The atem kruyim Adam. Al shem Adam le'elyon, because the Yidden are called Adam. Adam is named after Adam le'elyon. We are compared to the Eibishter. Shegam chayusam agash mashim nefesh elokis by a Yid. Even his gashmistic chayis is not coming only from the nefesh abamis. It's coming from the nefesh elokis. Shekol inyon yumitzu yusei du gufa Yisrael yushukli la neshama. So just like in the mashal, the nefesh abamis and the guf is the keli of the nefesh abamis, and therefore it does everything automatically. By a Yid, the nefesh elokis is what's giving its chayis, and therefore the guf of the Yid is a kli of the neshama. In order for the neshama to be able to fulfill the Eibishter's ratzon, which it has to do practical mitzvahs, tefillin, tzitzit, tzedakah, v'chulu. The only way the neshama could do these mitzvahs is through the guf. The whole mitzvahs of the guf is for this purpose. Because through the guf, the neshama could fulfill its purpose in this world, because only with the guf can it do gashmistic mitzvahs. Shekol tachlis mitzius shel ha'isha Yisraeli, the entire purpose and existence of the Yid, eina ela liyes mishkan le'yizbarach, is only for the purpose of being a mishkan for the Eibishter. Remember, there's all apostle, also the Mikdash Shachanti b'seicham, b'seich edenemer le b'seicham, b'seich lechav echad mi Yisrael, like the famous Maimer Chazal that the Rebbe repeated an infinite amount of times, that v'shachanti b'seicham, and within every single Yid, that every Yid is a mishkan le'yizbarach ve'enu metzias la'atzmai, and he's not his own independent entity. So, before we continue on this, on this build-up, I just want to stop and make sure we understand what we're holding. So he's saying like this. He's saying is that just like by the guf, the nefesh abamis, they are seamlessly connected, because the chayis of the guf comes from the nefesh abamis. By a yid, his chayis comes to the nefesh elikis, because the whole reason that it exists is only to be able to serve the nefesh elikis' purpose of doing mitzvahs, and therefore the yid's nefesh, the yid's guf is seamlessly connected with the Nefesh Elikis, not that it has to be commanded and controlled by the Nefesh Elikis or by the Neshama, but Ka'ifan Abeis, that the Neshama is, like the second Oifen in the beginning of Esav, the Neshama is so revealed in the Guf that the Guf is totally bottled to the Neshama. And he continues to in the middle of this of the second column of 103. And he continues to explain this idea that the whole purpose of the Yid is to be a Mishkan le'yizbarach, and he's not to be a Metzias to himself, and the whole purpose of the Yid is just like it says in Medrash that Ezo Isha Ksheira Isha that same Baila, that a Isha Ksheira is one who fulfills the ratzon of the Baal, of her husband. The Yid is the Eibishter's Isha Ksheira, and the whole purpose is to do the ratzon of Baal, which is the Eibishter, to fulfill what the Eibishter wants. And not only that the Yid is doing something to fulfill the Eibishter's ratzon, but more than that, Ubeifin Demasha Kana, it's the Isha Kana Baila, that whatever the Isha acquires, the Baal automatically acquires. And not only does she agree to transfer her acquisition to her husband because she wants to do his will, the husband acquires it automatically, because the husband and the wife are so seamlessly connected that whatever one owns, whatever the wife owns, the husband automatically owns. It's a very powerful mashal when you're talking about the Yid and the Eibishter, about the neshama of the guf, how they're so connected. And even if you're going to say, what about those people that are not on the level of an Ishak Sheda? They're not on that level that whatever the Eibishter wants, they do. At least they'll be in the level of Eved, Hashem's servant. Because being an Avedas Eved is the beginning and the primary and the source of root of all avoid. As he says in the beginning of Tanya Perek Aleph, that even if you can't come to the Ava, at least you could come to the Yira, to recognize that the whole Inyan is to serve the Hashem as an Eved. And by Eved has the same halacha, that whenever an Eved acquires, automatically the owner, the master, owns it. Not only he doesn't rebel against his master, and not only does he agree to utilize his own assets as the Adain what his master would want, or not even that he agrees to hand over his assets to his master. To begin with, the Nechasim don't belong to him. He is so bottled to his master that anything that he acquires automatically goes to his master. And so too by a Yid, anything that a Yid does is automatically connected to the Eibishter, and anything that the Guf does is automatically connected to the Neshama, because the Neshama has such a gilui, such a revelation, and therefore such an impact on the Guf, that the Guf becomes a bottle and a keli to the Neshama, and does not have its own independent entity. So, we started out saying that on Yud Tes Kislev, because there's a chiddush in Torah, there's a chiddush in the individual yid, in the hisgalus of the neshama and the guf. So we started explaining what's hisgalus on neshama and the guf. On one level, it means that the neshama can tell the guf what to do, and the guf listens. On another level, it means the neshama doesn't have to tell the guf what to do. The neshama is so revealed in the guf that the guf automatically does what the neshama wants. These two levels, we're going to say in Ois Beis, in Ois Vav, are these two levels of the of impact of the neshama and the guf will express themselves into two different levels of avodah, which are very commonly explained in the Rabbi Sichos, b'chol maasecha yiyu l'shem shamayim and b'chol derechecha de'eyu. These two levels, which are explained in many different sichos and will be explained here again, are an expression, respectively, of the two levels of impact that the neshama has on the guf that we just explained in the Esav. These two levels in the way the neshama reveals itself into the body. The first one, the neshama only controls the body, but the body retains its identity. The second definition is that the guf loses its identity and becomes totally bottled to the neshama. These two levels in the neshama are consistent with the two different manners or styles of aveda. Aleph kol masecha yul shem shemayim and beis b'chol derechecha de'eyu. It's known the difference between these two efanim has been explained in other sichos as well. Let's do the words. All your actions, all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. That when he does whatever he does, when he engages in his affairs, it's not for an ulterior motive, but it's solely for the purpose of heaven, for the Eibishter. But the actions, the deeds themselves are mundane actions. A person could be eating, could be drinking, could be going to work. He's doing regular things, but his kavanah, his intent, is for the Eibishter. But the Aveda of B'chol Derechecha De'eyu, who Be'efin kazeh shebchinas de'eyu yediyas havayi b'chol dracha v'inyanov atzmam, that the knowledge of Hashem is permeating everything that he's doing. Leisheim b'shvil de'eyu, not that he's doing his own personal things for the sake of de'eyu to know Hashem, ela shebehem v'al yadam atzmam yediyas Hashem. In the very action itself, he knows Hashem. So the first one is that you're doing something that's a gashmistic thing, a mundane thing, but it has a good intent. The second is that the thing itself is not mundane. The thing itself is permeated with the knowledge of Hashem. Now, Pirush Bazeh. And what does this mean? It means like this. One might suggest to say that the only way to reach the knowledge of Hashem is through being engaged only in holiness, learning the Eibishter's Torah and fulfilling his mitzvahs. One can ask, how is somebody going to reach the Eyu when he's involved in permissible things? Permissible things means say things that are not Kedusha. In his food, in his eating and his drinking, and in his daily business. That's what this pasuk is telling us. That in all of your ways you should know Hashem, and a person should endeavor that his eating should be holy, and it should be a mitzvah. Not only that a person should eat for the sake of being able to have the koyach to learn and daven afterwards, but the eating itself should be a mitzvah. For example, eating on Shabbos, which is a mitzvah to be ma'aneges HaShabbos, to enjoy Shabbos with food, or a sudas mitzvah, a bris, a chasana, a siyum, or eating kachim in the time that the Beis Hamikdash was standing, which these are all the eating physical food, but it's a mitzvah. And he brings in the Ha'ara about Yitzchak. The Yitzchak, he didn't plant actually Yitzchak Zara Dagon, and Zara Tzedakah. That even though Yitzchak means that the Yitzchak didn't plant a wheat, he planted tzedakah. Now, of course, the pasuk says he planted wheat. It means that it wasn't just that he wanted to have money so that he could have money in order to give ma'aser. The very planting of the wheat was totally for part of the mitzvah of ma'aser. So these are two different phenomena of Aveda. One is a chomasech al when a person is engaged in his mundane matters, but he has a proper intent. And then there's a higher level where he's engaged in spiritual things, even though it's doing something physical, in the physical action that he's doing, that it's something holy. Basic finding Aveda Elu and these two Efanim and Aveda. Kol Masecha Yulashim Shemayim B'chol Derecha De'eu Kshurim Utluyim B'Beis Madrega Shlos Galas and Neshama. They are dependent on the two levels of the Galas and Neshama, which we spoke in the previous days. Kishadar Gasais Galusa Ba'adami Be'efen De Shlita Laguf Aval Laguf Mitzis B'fnei Atzmi. When the level of the Neshama is revelation is to the point that it could control the body, but the body remains its own independent entity. Oz Avedasi B'chinas L'Shem Shemayim. Then he's on the first level of the Shem Shemaim. Meaning to say that mundane matters, body things, are still important to him. But the guf and all of its affairs are subjugated, are submitted to the neshama that is controlling it. Therefore, in actuality, everything that he does on the Shem Shemaim, since he has his own interests, but the neshama forces him, so to speak, that he should eat and drink, whatever, it should be l'shem shemayim. But if in the second level, if the neshama's revelation is to such a deep level that the guf is totally bottled, it doesn't have its own independent entity, then even when he engages in worldly matters, it's on a level of the eyu, and all in a level in the mundane thing itself. You know Hashem, because you don't detect any of the physical entity. It's only about knowing Hashem. So in Esav, he laid out for us that these two levels that we spoke about, the impact of the neshama on the guf, that the neshama controls the guf. Two, that the guf becomes buckled to the neshama, will be expressed in the aveda of B'chol Masach Yilashim Shemayim, which occurs when the neshama is controlling the guf. And Chol Derecha De'eu occurs when the guf is in a state of bittul to the neshama, and because of that, even his regular affairs are imbued with the knowledge of Hashem. In Eis Zayin, he's going to take the second level and he's going to break it down into two more levels. To say that within the idea of B'chol Derecha De'eu, even there you could see it in two different ways. In other words, you can see the impact of the neshama on two levels. Darkness b'chol derecha de'eu atzma yeshna meprotis bezefanim. More specifically, within the aveda b'chol derecha de'eu, there's two levels. Level one, even though, as we said, everything that he does is imbued with kedusha, with the knowledge of Hashem. But you still can feel, you still can experience the material aspect of it as well. For example, when you eat on Shabbos, the whole mitzvah is that you should enjoy Shabbos with fatty meat and aged wine. You're doing it as a mitzvah. It's a holy act that you're doing. But in order to fulfill this mitzvah, you have to experience the gashmius of it. That's how you enjoy this thing, and that's how you fulfill the mitzvah. So level 1 is your taka, doing it as a mitzvah, as a holy act. But it's a holy act that also allows you to experience the gashmius of whatever you're doing. Base. The second level, that his material or physical things that he's doing are so subjected, so bottle, so one with the lakus, their entire entity was transformed into holiness. You don't even experience, you can't feel the gashmis. Not only because there's so much oil involved, there's so much light of kedusha, because the person is so engaged in the da'ayu and the knowledge of Hashem. It's not because of the ribui oyer that drowns out the gashmis. No, it's because of the transformation that occurred, that the davar gashmi itself became kedusha, became holy. So level 1 is that you can still experience the gashmis, even though it's a holy thing that you're doing. Level 2 is that the gashmis, the element of gashmis is gone because it has been totally transformed into something that is only holy. And just like when we introduced the first two levels of the impact of the neshama and the guf, we used the mashal of the nefesh abamis and the guf to understand in the nimshul the nefesh alekis and the guf. Again, we're going to use a mashal from the nefesh abamis to understand this idea, specifically the second level, that you do not experience the gashmias. The gam inyan zeh, also this inyan, the second level that we just discussed, move on me'ethin bittul haguf l'chayusha shel nefesh abamis, could be understood from the manner of the bittul of the guf to the nefesh abamis. The hine klal yadu'ahu, because it's a very known fact, known rule. Shekeshaguf adam ubari, that when the person's body is healthy, then he doesn't feel his body. The fact that you don't feel anything, he simin shabariyu, is the sign of health. When he starts feeling something, even if he doesn't feel a pain, he feels some weight, he feels something as a varav. He feels something, some weight, some heaviness in his limbs. The head, or the heart, the hand, or the foot. When you start feeling something in your hand, you know that there's something wrong with your hand. It could be, you overworked it, you worked too hard, you feel a cramp. As soon as you feel something, you know that something is wrong. Either in that limb or in the whole body. What's the reason that you usually don't feel anything? Because his entire entity is the life force that's coming from the nefesh. Therefore, he doesn't feel it. When everything is working right, there's a total bittul. In other words, it's almost as if to say that when a person feels a headache or feels something in his guf, his guf is rebelling. There's a disconnect in the chayis, and the proper chayis. Therefore, the guf, that disconnect is creating a feeling. But if everything is working right, then you don't feel anything because the bittul is intact. The bittul of the guf to its chayis is intact. The same thing in the nimshal will be with regards to nefesh alekis. Yehudi bari huzeh, a healthy yid is one. Shekol gufay v'nafshaya b'hamis v'chelkei b'elam in negoshin lemitzias, that the bittul is so strong in his guf, in his nefesh abamis, in his chelkei b'elam, v'chol mitzvus nefesh alekis. The whole Metzias of Nefesh Elokis, the Neshama, is so functional and so impactful on the person that all of the gashmius of the person is bottled to the Neshama. So what he feels is Neshama. So if he's eating something, he's going to bring the mashal of eating in a moment. So we'll do it from inside. But before we bring the mashal, so when a person is engaged in gashmias, he doesn't feel the gashmias at all. He doesn't experience any gashmias. That's this second level within the second level. For example, we're going back to Achila. Previously, we brought the example of Achila on Shabbos, where you're experiencing the geschmackshaft of the food. And that's how you're doing the mitzvah. So now he's going to make another example in Achila. That the whole, when he eats it, the food, the whole experience is that his purpose is to draw down a lakus into the food that he is eating. And through bringing it into the food, he's bringing a lakus into the world, into the physical, materialistic world. And how do you draw it down? Through the bracha. He's making a bracha. Al Michael, he's making a bracha on the food. Melech ha'elam. That's why he's eating the food. What does he experience when he eats the food? That the Eibishter is the king of the world. That the Elokus is Balabas on Welt. So, and the example before we brought up eating on Shabbos, you have to experience Gashmias. In order to enjoy the food and be ma'anages on Shabbos, you have to feel Gashmias. The next level is when the person eats solely for the purpose of recognizing and acknowledging and letting the world know that Elokeinu melech haolam. So the Gashmias of the food is irrelevant. You don't feel the Gashmias. You feel the fact that the Eibishter is melech haolam. And the same thing applies to business, even though he's involved in business as businessmen will do, as merchants will do. In other words, he's doing everything regularly. The whole experience of what he's doing is the knowledge of Hashem. As the story, the famous story about Rabbi Yamin Kletzker, from the great Talmidim of the Alter Rebbe. His business was in the lumber business. His parnasa was from the lumber business. That's why he was called Kletzker. Kletzker from the word lumber, klotz. One time he was taking an accounting of his business inventory and an accounting of the lumber. On the bottom of the page, when it came to writing out the sum total, he wrote Einid Muvade. There's nothing besides Hashem. But Rabbi Yamin Kletzker, this was the sum total of his whole business. That there's nothing in this world but Hashem. That the whole business is all Elokus. So, just to summarize this last ois over here, so just like not feeling anything is a sign of a healthy body, not feeling anything, beruchnius, meaning to say not to feel the gashmius of what you're doing, is a sign of a healthy neshama v'guf relationship. And the highest level so far that we've discussed, and I think the highest level that is that you don't feel the gashmius of the food or the gashmius of the business or the gashmius of the experience, and what you're doing, even though it's a mundane act, it's a physical act, nevertheless, it is all about the ruchnius and the elokus that is being brought into the world because of it. I want to summarize everything up until here, but before I do that, we're going to learn one more ois, which is a geschmacka story, a very famous story of the Alter Rebbe, where we see the Alter Rebbe living in this oifen. Ois ches. Every detail and every aspect in Avedis Hashem that Teres Achsidus demands of us, first and foremost, our Rebbe's paved the way for us with their Aveda, that we should be able to do this Aveda as well. Make an opinion, and now so too in this above mentioned inyan of doing physical things and not feeling the physicality. Also the Rabbeim paved the way for us. As it is known, the story about the Alter Rebbe, which we see clearly from its story, its content, that he did not experience, he didn't feel the existence of the physical, and his entire being was his nefesh lekis. What's the story? He once hosted a very important guest. It's interesting that the Sikha does not mention who the guest was. Because he was a very special, distinguished guest, the members of the household decided that they would divide amongst themselves the different responsibilities in preparing the food, cooking and preparing the food in his honor. And this is what it was. This is what they did. One detail, one seemingly unimportant detail was forgotten when dividing up the responsibilities. Which member of the household will have the privilege of putting salt in the food? When each of them remembered about the salt, everyone wanted to have the privilege, the schus, to do so. And each one put the salt, the proper measurement of salt into the food without telling the other person about it. When the food was brought to the Alter Rebbe and his distinguished guest, the Alter Rebbe ate it as he usually would. But the guest tasted the food and then moved it aside. When the Alter Rebbe asked him why he's not eating it, he answered very simply, it's too salty. No, Admor Azakin. So the question was, how did Alter Rebbe eat it if it's too salty? So Alter Rebbe said, while still being in Mezrich, as a Talmud of the Magid, he worked on himself to not experience taste, to not feel taste when he eats. So from this story we see that the Alter Rebbe lived in a way that when he engaged in Gashmias, such as eating, he didn't feel the Gashmias at all. He didn't even feel the taste of the food. And even though this level is really only applicable to Bnei Aliyah, to someone on a higher level, like the Alter Rebbe, since the story reached us, since we know the story, this is a proof to us that at least at certain times or in certain situations, it is possible, and therefore it is obligatory that at least on some level we should experience this, even if we are a simple person. In the Ara 41, he references Perik Memdalad of Tanya, where it says about Moshe Rabbeinu, even though could think that he's even an iota to be on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, nevertheless, efetz kotzeyu v'shemetz mineyu mirav tu ve'erei meir l'klalos Yisrael, that at least a little bit and a drop of a drop Moshe gave to every Yid, and therefore we can experience a little bit of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Alter Rebbe paved the way for us, so if not, we can't necessarily expect of ourselves to live this experience on a regular day, but in special times and in a special situation, we could expect from ourselves, and therefore we must demand from ourselves at least to do something similar to this. And even those who feel that they cannot reach this level, that they should not feel the Gashmis because they're so unified or one with a Lakus, even in special times they can do so. A person should at least affect themselves, have the effect on themselves, that they should be so distracted by the Aveda of knowing Hashem, at least that should make him, to distract him from the Gashmias. We see clearly that when a person is very excited or very emotional, he can't feel the taste of food. So if you can't reach this level because of the fact you're still a gasmitic person and you haven't reached this level, but at least try to experience da'eyu to the point that you're so distracted by the da'eyu that you don't feel the gasmis. So, to summarize where we're holding here, we introduced the fact that on Yud Tes Kislev, not only was there a chiddush in Teres Achsidus, but there's also a chiddush in the Isgalus of the neshama of a yidden to the guf. And we said that there's two levels of the Isgalus of the neshama. One, that the neshama controls the guf. Two, that the guf is so bottled to the neshama that it loses its identity. And we said that this is expressed in the two Avedis of Kamasechel Hashem Shemayim, where he has his own mundane actions, but at least they are L'Shem Shemayim, and B'chol Derechecha De'eyu, that in everything that he does, there is permeated the knowledge of Hashem. And then we went into a deeper level, that within the knowledge of Hashem, one is that you still feel the Gashmias, and two, that you don't feel the Gashmias at all. And these are the different levels that you can experience the Isgalus of the Neshama in the Guf. And now we're going to go back to what this has to do with Yud Tes Kislev. Yud Tes. And this is the Chiddush of Yud Tes Kislev. In the idea of Yefutzum Nesecha Chutza, not at this point, we're not talking about the Mayonis of Teres Achsidis. We're talking about the Mayonesecha Ba'anagoseh Shel Elam Katan Zehadam. In the conduct of the person, which every person is a micro world, and therefore, just like in the macro world, there was a chiddush of Yud Tes Kislev in the hafatzas hamayonis of Teres Achsidus to the world, this also is reflected in the individual person. In the term, the words Yafutzu Ma'nesecha Chutza, there's two ideas emphasized. Aleph shemayonis atzmam nemshachim b'chinas chutza. Number one, that not just that the well springs impact the outside world, but the mayonis themselves go out of themselves and into the world. That the fact that they're going out into the world is not just that they're going out right outside themselves and they're staying right outside, but in a level of yafutzu, such a broad and great dissemination that there's nowhere in the world that remains empty of these mayonis. Shami explains in the parentheses, if there's a place that the mayonis haven't yet reached, this means that their dissemination, their outspread is limited. That's not Yafutzu. Yafutzu means that it continues consistently, infinitely to spread out until there's nowhere in the world where it hasn't spread out. So how does this reflect in the person's avodah? Every yid has his well. Referring to the neshama, that is the origin of everything, because the neshama comes from the beneath the kisei hakavod. And even at a higher level, the neshama is ta'irah, it comes from Atzilus. So this wellspring, this neshama, has to come out of itself and go into his guf, and it should shine and be revealed in the guf, asher in all of his material or physical engagements, which on their own, they're really outside of the border of the boundary of the neshama. It's a chutza legabe the neshama. But yafutzu ma'nesecha chutza means that the neshama goes out of itself and impacts the guf. And this revelation of the well of the neshama in the bodily engagements, so it has to be on a level of yafutzu, of spreading itself out beyond anything. And on both the levels mentioned above, the neshama not only controls the guf, but the neshama is actually in the guf. Then not only that the neshama is the avodas b'chol masechel l'shem shemayim, which means that the neshama is controlling the guf, that whatever it does, all of its guf things, it should be for a holy purpose. But more than that, that everything that he's doing is actually serving Hashem. B'chol derechecha de'eyu, that the Hashem's knowledge permeates everything that he does. But the revelation of the neshama and the guf is at such a level of yafutzu that it goes even to a deeper level, which is the second thing that we spoke about in Siv Beis. The second thing that in Siv Zayin, that the neshama pervades the guf in such a way that it overflows. His pashtos built in mugbeles, an infinite dissemination. Actually, nisher mokim lahargish agufi. There's nowhere left that the guf could feel itself. Because the neshama totally overwhelmed and overtaken the guf entirely. So, by explaining yafutzu ma'nesecha chutza, yafutzu ma'nesecha chutza means by the person, number one, that the mayon goes into the chutza, that the neshama goes into the guf, and number two, yafutzu, that it goes in such a way that not only it's beyond the kol masachal Hashem shemayim, but it reaches the kol derech echad de'eyu, but even more so, like he explained in Siv Zayin, the second level of within the second level, that the neshama, that the guf doesn't even feel guf, doesn't feel gashmias. It's like Eined Milvade, or like not tasting the soup, not tasting the salt. The guf has totally overwhelmed the body, so the body is so bottled to the guf, to the neshama, that it doesn't even feel any gashmias. So that's the pshat, yafutzu ma'nesecha chutza, with regards to Avedas Ha'adam, and that's what happens on Yud Tes Kislev, happened, and therefore happens on Yud Tes Kislev, that not only was there a chiddush in Teres HaChassidus, but there was also a chiddush in the impact of the neshama and the guf, and the gilui of the neshama and the guf of the yid. If you'll remember, we started out saying that this was a message that was coming from the Maggid of Mezrich on his final Shabbos on this earth to Chassidim and to the Alter Rebbe specifically, and connected to Yud Tes Kislev even more specifically. So now we're going to go back to see how this understanding of Yud Tes Kislev is learned from this Torah of the Maggid. Es Yud. According to all this, we'll understand with even more of an understanding the teaching of the Maggid Hanal, as mentioned at the beginning of the Sikha. The Pirush Malachim Mamish, Sh'amar Lefnei Yud Tes Kislev, which he said before Yud Tes Kislev. Yom Histalkus, the day of his Histalkus, his passing. And we'll also understand the connection between this Torah and the Geula of the Alter Rebbe, the release of the Alter Rebbe from imprisonment in Yud Tes Kislev, which on that day was introduced to the world, the idea on a whole new level of Yafutzu Manesecha Chutza. Here's the explanation. The whole idea of the neshama coming down to this world, to be mevarer the guf and this chelkei ba'elam, and to turn this world into a dira for the Eibishter, a dwelling place for Hashem, he dugma sa'inyan de Vayishlach-19 malachim gemer Esav, is a metaphor for the idea of Yaakov sending malachim to Esav, sheshlichis zu ha'isab b'chdei levarer the kanal sif aleph, which the shlichis of Yaakov sending malachim to Esav was for the purpose of being mevarer Esav. Ukeshem shashlichis al Yaakov al Esav ha'isab tzarech li is dafka al yidei malachim mamish ken nizkelel sham. Just like the shlichis of Yaakov to Esav had to be in a way that it was malachim mamish. As we explained earlier, so too when the shlichus of the neshama to come down to be mevarer the guf in the world, which is coming to be mevarer not just elamat tikun, but also elamat tayu. Elamat tayu is the world where there's a lot of light, but not so many kelim to contain that light. And in Chassidus it explains that Yaakov comes from Tikkun and Esav comes from Teyu. So the neshama is coming down to this world to fix Eilam HaTeyu as well. Asher zeu dafke al yedei she'adam me'eder ba'atzmei. Es b'chinas ha'malachim, es ha'ruchni yeshabai. The only way that a person could fulfill this shlichus to be mevarer this world is only if he awakens within himself the malach within him, the angel within him, which means the ruchnius in him. Only if a person feels and experiences his ruchnius, his spirituality, his neshama, only then can he actually fulfill his shlichus to change the world. Since it's possible that the birur, that the elevation or the refinement or the cleansing of the inyanim agashmim could be only as kol masach l'shem shemayim, shaz neshama be'elas beguf rak ba'efen shashlita ve'elim, that then the neshama is still concealed from the guf and it's only controlling the guf. At shaguf kechiseh shal neshama hamalobashim beguf asukim bay v'al yodam yodei b'nyani ha'elam harei mitzias latefes asmakim la'atzma. But then comes out that the guf and the keiches of the neshama that are melubish in the guf and that are involved with the worldly matters because of the guf are still their own independent entity. It's possible that it's a level, the first level that we discussed, is that the guf still feels itself as a mitzias, and therefore, as independent from the neshama, and although the neshama controls the guf, but the neshama still is investing efforts into a guf, which is investing efforts into a world. That could be a problem. Therefore, the Maggid has to tell us that the ultimate purpose, the ultimate goal, and the ultimate, I guess you could say purpose, the ultimate purpose of birurim, the ultimate way to fulfill the birurim, is only if the keiches of the neshama that are involved in the Yonim Gashmim, HaMalachim, B'shlichusum shel El Esav, the Malachim that are coming from Yaakov in their shlichus to Esav, in Re'akim B'chinas Mamish. The only way the shlichus really works is if the Malach remains as a Mamish. Sheim Tfeilim, U'B'Teilim, U'Yuchadim, B'Tachlis, B'chinas Aruchnis V'Neshama. That they are secondary, and that they are batul, and because of that they are one with their essence, which is the ruchnis of the neshama. That the highest level of neshama, that the highest level of the neshama should be so spread out of itself, so outside of itself, that it totally overwhelms the guf into a total bit. So the neshama goes to the furthest chutzah into the guf. In other words, what the Maggid was basically teaching us is that when the Malachim went to Esav, the mamish of the Malachim, the reality of the Malachim, the spirituality of the Malachim remained connected. The mamish of the Malachim went to Esav, but the spirituality of the Malachim always remained connected to Yaakov. Which means to say that the ruchnius of the neshama has to function in the guf, bringing it from the highest level of connection all the way down into the guf. The only way to do the shlichus is when the neshama is connected to its highest source and comes down into the guf, and that's the ultimate yafutzim and esachachutz. So now we understand what the Maggid was saying. The Maggid was saying to the Alter Rebbe and to all those of us that are following in the derech of the Alter Rebbe, that the goal of life, of us living on this earth, is to bring Elokus into this world. The only way we can do that properly is b'shas we retain our connection to our source, and we allow that highest level of the neshama to come down in a level of yafutzu, that it totally overwhelms the guf. I don't know if overwhelms the right word, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. That it totally in Yiddish the word is farfleitzen. It totally overflows the guf to the point that the guf doesn't feel any of its physicality, any of its materialism, and it is totally dedicated to the cause. Eis Yud Aleph. Now, till now we were explaining from Yafutzu Manesecha Chutza in the world to Yafutzu Manesecha Chutza in the Neshama Beguf. Now let's go back to the Yafutzu Manesecha into the world. The simple understanding is Lahafitz Mayones Achsidus B'chol Makom U'Makom, to spread out, to disseminate the well springs of Chassidus into every place. The Seder was arranged by the Rabbi. That they sent shluchim to various places to disseminate and to reveal and to bring out the wellsprings of Chassidus. And this shlichus also has the same lesson of Malachim Mamish. Keleimar, meaning to say, it's clear that the shliach has to fulfill his shlichus. Not just on a level to fulfill his obligation, with every fiber of his being. Because then, nevertheless, even though he's doing all of his own efforts, all of gamli zoyer me'ed. He has to be very careful that the place, the outside world that he's going to, where he is teaching and spreading these well springs, should not cause on him any descent, any negative effect. And how does a person make sure that the chutzah should not have an effect on him? And on the contrary, that it should be transformed by him to a wellspring of kedusha. The proper advice for this is that even when he is involved in chutzah matters, it should be permanent in his heart. It should be it should be deep into his heart. Haregesh, the feeling. That everything he's doing is solely for the fulfillment of the kavanah, of the purpose, of the intent of his mishaleach, of the one who sent him out into the world. And this is the lesson that the Maggid teaches to shluchim. Only their guf, only their physical element should be involved in their shlichus into the chutzah. Their spirituality, it should remain totally connected to the Meshaleach to Yaakov. It should be deep rooted into their hearts. Even while they are engaged in the spreading of the wellsprings. That the fact that they are involved in the chutzah is only because they're fulfilling the shlichus of the Meshaleach. Without involving any ulterior motive, any ulterior issues. Just like the guf, which the guf, once it's impacted by the neshama, his entire entity, his entire essence is the ruchnius in the neshama. So too, when a person is out in the world, is engaged in the world, he has to know that he's there solely for his mishalech and for nothing else. Because then the ruchnius of the shliach is by the mishalech. The Baal Shem Tov taught that wherever a person wants to be, that's where he is. So if a person really wants to be by the Mishaleach, and the only reason he's in the chutzah is because he's fulfilling the shlichus of the Mishaleach, and he has no other business in the chutzah, and he has no other interest in the chutzah, then he is with his Mishaleach, because that's where he wants to be. And when we fulfill this lesson, that the bitter of the chutzah of Esav should be in the manner of malachim mamash, that he's only giving them his gashmius, but his ruchnius remains kosher to the mishaleach. This itself gives the kayach to fulfill the shlichus, that ultimately the chutzah will be transformed into mayonis, into the wellsprings of chassidus. until that we are zeicha through this to the fulfillment of the promise that the Moshim, those who are bringing the Yeshua, are going to go up Har Tzion to be shofet Har Esav, that the whole world, even those who are in the level of Esav and the Chutzah, even by them will be Vayishlach-19. They will recognize that the Eibishter is the king. That is the ultimate fulfillment of the shlichus, that the whole world, even Esav, should acknowledge the Melech HaElam, that the Eibishter is the king, and the way to get there is by fulfilling the shlichus in a way that we are engaged in the shlichus only, and there's no other reason. And there's no other engagement in the chutzah, because our ratzon and our iskashrus is to the mishaleach, and therefore and therefore we could bring the whole world to the eibishter, to the mishaleach. L'shana teva, b'limud achsidus, to b'darki achsidus, tikaseu v'seichasemu. May we be able to continue learning chassidus and to bringing the chassidus into dark, that we learn into darki achsidus, into the fulfillment of our shlichus, of Mimefitz the Mayonis Chutzah, and we should be zeichet to this yiyud of the coming of Mashiach. Numala ha'aretz de'as Hashem kamayim layom v'chasim. Good yontif.